Buddhist terminology. What you're watching this week is the second of the series on the basic concepts of Buddhism. Therefore, what we're going to discuss today is on the Four Noble Truths. Last week, we spoke on the theory of dependent origination. The Buddha, when he attained enlightenment, became awakened to the truth of dependent origination. However, the Buddha felt that this idea was too difficult for the sentient beings to understand or accept. He was afraid that if he simply just taught this idea to the sentient beings, maybe they will be too afraid of this difficult theory. Therefore, instead, he decided to teach the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths therefore became the first teachings given by the Buddha. This was also called the first turning of the Dharma wheel. Here, Four Noble Truths in Chinese means 四圣谛. Thus, the word 圣, which is noble, means righteousness, so that those who are ignorant, therefore those who are noble, will be able to understand the Dharma. And as for the word 谛, it means truth in English, so that nothing is false or misleading, that when something is presented as the truth. The Four Noble Truths and dependent origination, added with the three Dharma seals, were amongst the basic concepts of Buddhism. So from this we know that dependent origination is pretty much the same as that the ideas presented in the Four Noble Truths. The only difference is that the Four Noble Truths is much easier to understand. Why? Because it turns the focus of dependent origination directly onto the human life. Therefore, as we talk about the Four Noble Truths, it will appear much more relevant to our everyday life than when we first contact the idea of dependent origination. So the contents of the Four Noble Truths include the following. The first one is the truth of suffering. In Chinese, it's 苦. And second, it's the truth of the origin or cause of suffering. In Chinese, it becomes 集. And third, it's the truth of the end or the cessation of suffering. So in Chinese, it becomes 灭. And lastly, it's the truth of the way that leads to the end or the cessation of suffering. So in Chinese, it's 道. Together, these four makes the Four Noble Truths. You can see the word suffering within all of the Four Noble Truths. Here, suffering has a Sanskrit word which means dukkha, and which basically means unsatisfactory or being unsatisfied about things. So by understanding the Four Noble Truths, we realize that we need to depend a lot on our wisdom. For the Four Noble Truths, tells us that life, for the first point, life is full of suffering. Second, suffering is caused by our attachment to delusion. And thirdly, enlightenment or complete liberation from all suffering is possible. Fourthly, which is last, the Four Noble Truths then tells us how we can become enlightened. If we look closely to the four items or the relationship between these four truths, we can see that suffering, which acts as the effect, suffering is the effect of the cause of suffering. Therefore here, the first item is the effect, while the second is the cause. And the end of suffering becomes the effect of the path to the end of suffering, which is the cause. You may then wonder why the Buddha actually placed these four truths in their order. Wouldn't it make more sense to place the causes in front of the effects? So shouldn't we have the two causes together and then the effects? Well, because the Buddha placed them in this order, so for the reason that effect is much easier to understand than the cause. So he hopes that once we understand the effect, we may be inspired or have the desire to understand what the cause is and try to liberate ourselves from suffering. Therefore, what the Buddha did was, he first described the problem, then the cause. And after that, he talked about the solution. And what came last was how to achieve this solution. So from the above, we can actually feel the Buddha's compassion in making his teachings and explanations understandable for us, the sentient beings, who are yet to uncover our Buddha nature and also our wisdom. Now, I would like to talk about each of the Four Noble Truths in detail. The first of the Four Noble Truths is suffering. The Buddha saw that it is not possible for human beings to be satisfied with everything in this world. Therefore, once we are unsatisfied about certain things or everything in this world, there will be suffering. And here I would like to discuss the three ways to which we describe suffering. The first is the true sufferings. And this is the most basic classification of suffering. First of the true sufferings is internal suffering. This means the suffering that we tend to see as a part of ourselves, which of course is a delusion. For example, our physical pain, the pain I'd feel in my shoulder or my head, or also the emotional suffering such as fear or anxiety. All of these are the internal sufferings. Second of the two sufferings is external suffering. So this means the suffering that comes from the outside. For example, the suffering which is caused by changes in our environment. Say, for example, when it's too cold, or when it's too hot, or when there are natural accidents, or wars, or criminals. All of things cause external suffering. And these are the kinds of sufferings that nobody can escape from. Next of the three ways of describing suffering is the three sufferings. And these focuses more on the quality of suffering than its original type. The first one is called inherent suffering or physical suffering. This is the suffering caused by just being alive. So we will feel pain, we will feel sickness, we will feel the suffering caused by wind and rain in our environment. And also there could be the suffering caused by wild animal attacks. For example, we go into the woods, there could be bears, things like this. Secondly is the latent suffering. Latent suffering is suffering that is hidden within even the best of times. For example, we die, or good things always come to an end, or things could break. All of these are called latent suffering. The third is called active suffering. This is a suffering caused by being a world of constant change. So, for example, there are certain sayings such as time flies, or nothing lasts forever. So these are the experiences of anxiety or fear or the helplessness that comes from us sitting here and seeing everything change constantly, and there's nothing we can do about it. So these are the three sufferings. Next are the 8 sufferings, and these are a more detailed description of the sufferings that all of us as sentient beings must endure. The first one is the suffering caused by birth. Therefore, after spending 9 dangerous months in our mother's womb, there could be the pain and fear of birth. And after we're born, anything could happen. So we're like prisoners in our bodies that are born into this world. Secondly is the suffering of old age. If we're lucky enough to live safely through our younger days, there will be old age. So we have to go through the suffering of seeing both our body and our mind decline, and to, of course, watch the people around us die one by one. Thirdly is the suffering of illness. Good health is a contrast to illness. So at some time, we must suffer from the pain of humiliation and illness. Fourth is the suffering of death. So no matter how good our life can be, death is eventual. And here, death could either be sudden, it could be frightening, or it could be slow or painful. So basically, we're just like leaves being blown in the wind, and we'll never know what is going to happen tomorrow. So there lies the fear of not knowing whether we're going to wake up the next day when we lie in our bed tonight. The next is the suffering of lost love. This is about losing the ones we love or not being able to be with them. So suffering is caused by not being able to be with the ones that we love. And the sixth is the suffering of being hated. So in this world, none of us want enemy, but it's inevitable for us to be around people who dislike us. Let us go into a short break, and I will continue with the 8 sufferings. Welcome back. Let us continue with the 8 sufferings. The 7th of the 8 sufferings is the suffering of unfulfilled desires. Most of the time, our desire or our wants will determine the kind of people we become. So these are what actually stops us from understanding the Dharma. Furthermore, our desires could cause trouble. And we know that from the time we start to have desire, it already hurts us. And when it comes to the time that cannot be fulfilled, they hurt us twice. So the final of the 8 sufferings is suffering of the 5 skandhas. The 5 skandhas are form, sensation, perception, activity, and consciousness. Together, these 5 skandhas make up the building blocks of consciousness existence, and of course these are what cause suffering. So these 5 skandhas are like an unlimited source of fuel that produce pain and suffering, life after life. We have just discussed some of the basic ways to understand how the human life is related to suffering. So now, let's go deeper and explore what the basic causes of suffering can be. And there are some reasons, and with the first one being that the self is not in perfect harmony with our material world or the phenomenal world. For example, when we live in this world, we continue to try and make ourselves comfortable in this world. So when the weather is too hot or cold, or when our possession requires a lot of attention from us, or when the place we're living is too big or small, or the clothes we wear start to wear out, start to get old. All of these cause suffering because we can never get everything we want. And the second reason is that the self is not in perfect harmony with other people. So for example, it's about not being able to be with the people we want to be with, or the fact that we're forced to spend time with people we dislike or people who dislike us. Third is that the fact that the self is not in perfect harmony with the body. For example, we get sick, or we get old, and we pass away, or we die. So therefore, we have very little control over what happens with our body. Therefore, it causes suffering. And the fourth reason is that the self and the mind are not in perfect harmony. So because we know that our ideas run so fast, it goes from one to the next so fast, that it's like a wild horse in the wind. But these are all delusive mental activities that cause suffering. And even if we know this, we still find it hard to control our mind. The fifth reason is that the self and its desires are not in perfect harmony. We know that desire produces karma and suffering. However, even though we know this is a fact, we still cannot control our desires. So, because another example is that we know certain things are bad, or we know certain things are best for us, but we still cannot do it. For example, by knowing that eating junk food is bad for our health, we still eat it because we want to fulfill our appetites or our other desires. The sixth reason to why suffering is caused is the fact that the self and its views are not in good harmony. This basically means wrong views. So when what we believe in is not in good accordance with the truth, troubles will occur because we'll just continue to make the same mistakes over and over again. The seventh reason is the fact that the self is not in perfect harmony with nature. Therefore, there could be rain or flood or drought or other forces of nature beyond our control which can cause a lot of suffering. The Buddha taught us about suffering not to scare us or not to make us despair. Instead, he's trying to help us look clearly at the truth of life. Therefore, instead of trying to avoid suffering, once we understand the truth of suffering, this should inspire us to want to overcome suffering. Now, for the full understanding of the First Noble Truth, which we have just gone through, should make us want to understand what the Second Noble Truth is about. The Second Noble Truth is the cause or the origin of suffering. The origin of all suffering comes from the three poisons. People chain themselves to the painful and delusive phenomenal world because of their strong attachment to greed, anger, and ignorance. These three, greed, anger, and ignorance, are called poison because they poison both our mental and physical behavior, so they stop us from seeing what this world truly is. Also, the three poisons are sometimes called the three fires because they cause bad karma. Therefore, suffering is caused. So it feels as if these are burning. A good example is like us being inside a house on fire. When the fire is burning, we will naturally feel a lot of pain and suffering. The first of the three poisons is greed. Greed is a result of our attachment or clinging to the things in this world. For example, most of us tend to cling to money, fame, or lust. There is a story that demonstrates this idea. One day, the Buddha and his disciples were traveling along a road, and suddenly the Buddha saw a bag of gold sitting on the side of the road. So he said to his disciples, "Look at that. It's a bag of gold, but this is a poisonous snake." After hearing this, his disciples said to the Buddha, "Yes, this is a poisonous snake." A farmer working nearby overheard the conversation and became curious over what that snake really is. So he waited until the Buddha and his disciples left, and he came onto the road and saw that bag. And after opening up the bag and realizing that it was actually a bag of gold, he found it very strange. Well, this is a bag of gold, so why did the Buddha say that it was a poisonous snake? He could not understand this. Therefore, he took the gold home with him. Unfortunately, that was a period when it was only the king who was allowed to have gold. So the news of this farmer possessing gold traveled quickly, and it traveled to the ears of the king. The king became angry and arrested this farmer. So from this we can see that the bag of gold, was actually really a poisonous snake. But the snake is not really just the gold. In fact, the snake or the poisonous snake we're talking here is our greed or attachment that causes us trouble. The second of the three poisons is anger. Anger is a result of things not turning out the way we want them to be. So anger could turn friends into enemies. It could turn lovers into strangers. Even a sentence not pleasing to the ear could cause a fight just because of our anger. So this is like the flame of anger that burns off the forest of merit and virtue. So the merit and virtue we have accumulated will all be burned off by the anger like a torch of fire. The last of the three poisons is ignorance. This is a result of not understanding the law of causes and conditions. Once there was a rich man who saw his friend, how his friend had a newly built 3-story house. So he wanted the same thing. Therefore, he went to his architect and said, "Build me a 3-storied house." And as they were starting to build the foundation, the rich man became angry and said, "I only want the 3rd floor. Why do you give me the foundation?" And as the architect could not do anything, he had to do but listen to the rich man and build him only the 3rd floor. But of course, this quickly collapsed. So without building a foundation, anything we do cannot be strong and firm. So the troubles here is caused by our ignorance. Let us take a very short break now, and after that, let me continue on speaking on the third item of the three poisons, which is ignorance. So please stay with us. Don't go away.